Kenya's parliament has voted to withdraw from the International Criminal Court. The decision comes just before the country's president and deputy president are scheduled to go on trial at the ICC. Now, if Kenya does leave the court, what are the likely consequences? Henry Ridgwell tells us more from London.
The parliamentary motion calling for Kenya to withdraw from the International Criminal Court passed easily after opposition MPs walked out. The decision comes just before the country's president and deputy president are to face trial at the ICC in The Hague, accused of crimes against humanity following the 2007 elections. Majority Leader Aden Duale put forward the motion to withdraw from the court.
Mr. Speaker, I think as a country, we have today made a statement based on our sovereignty nation.
Deputy President William Ruto and journalist Joshua Arap Sang are to go on trial Tuesday. President Uhuru Kenyatta is scheduled for November. They are accused of organising widespread killings after the 2007 elections. More than 1,000 people were killed in the resulting violence. All three deny the allegations. ICC spokesman FADI ABDULLAH says the prosecutions do not violate Kenya's sovereignty.
Every state that is part of the ICC, including Kenya, freely exercise its sovereign right to join. And the people of Kenya freely exercise their democratic right during the presidential elections. The ICC process is judicial, and it should not be politicized.
William Ruto and Uhuru Kenyatta were opponents in 2007 but formed an alliance for this year's elections in March. Their campaign portrayed the ICC as interfering in Kenya's domestic affairs. Kenya's withdrawal could have broad consequences, says Phil Clark, an analyst at London School of Oriental and African Studies.
It would mean that Kenya would stop cooperating in terms of the ICC's investigations on the ground, in terms of protecting witnesses and the practical elements of the case. And I guess on a wider frame, there's a high chance that other African states will see this as a green light for them to do likewise.
The African Union has accused the ICC of hunting Africans because of their race, a charge the court strongly denies. But the contenders in the 2007 elections came from opposing ethnic blocs. Phil Clark says the African Union's view is gaining strength in Africa.
You have very powerful actors, including the US and other members of the Security Council, who are willing to use the ICC around the world when it suits them, to intervene in cases where Western powers have interests, but not to sign up to the court themselves.
Kenya's withdrawal from the ICC would take up to a year and still requires the government, not Parliament, to formally notify the United Nations Secretary-General. Henry Ridgwell for VOA News, London.
Well, for more perspective, we are joined via Skype by Charles JALLOH, Assistant Professor of International Criminal Law at the University of Pittsburgh School of Law. Professor JALLOH, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. Now, if you can you kind of give us a sense of the logic behind Kenya's parliamentarians' move?
Well, that's a tough question because actually only the leader of the House who presented the motion can probably explain it. But what they have presented is an argument that there are fundamental change of circumstances in Kenya and that they did not think that the International Criminal Court should any longer be involved with the work that it's doing in Kenya, essentially suggesting that as your lead mentioned, the fact that the current president and vice presidents are both indicted by the court is getting very uncomfortable to the members of parliament who moved for this motion and actually, unfortunately, got it passed yesterday.
Now, we know that it will take a hold here before Kenya can cease being a signatory, that is, if the bill passes eventually. Question here is, how does this impact the ongoing process at the ICC?
Actually, that's what's baffling to me because it doesn't impact the process at all. As a legal matter, obviously, Kenya has a sovereign right to choose to join an international criminal court regime, but it could also exercise that right under the rules to withdraw from that process. What is interesting, though, is that even if a state decides to withdraw, as Kenya is proposing to do, it still has the same obligations as before. So the cases actually will not stop. They will continue, and the decision to withdraw essentially then becomes more of a political statement on the work of the court, and perhaps maybe they could try to stop cooperating. Although as a legal matter, under the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, under Article 127, they're required to continue to cooperate with the court. So it's actually quite baffling for me as to why Kenya would try to withdraw now, because the clearly big interest here is the two cases against the president and vice president, respectively. Those will not stop at all. Those will continue under the law.
Even eventually say they completely withdraw. How if they defy the court, what happens to them?
Well, if they defy the court, there are a number of possibilities under the Rome Statute. The first thing is obviously, as a legal matter, the Security Council has a role to play in the work of the International Criminal Court. And the one option of the court officials, especially the prosecutor, will be to report any non-cooperation on the part of Kenya to the Security Council. Now, that may not sound like much, but actually the voice of the international community that is interested in Kenya, that showed concern for the post-election violence, including the UN Security Council, will be very concerned about any possible non-cooperation. So I think at a political level, it will be very difficult for Kenya, although they could, at the governmental level, make it very hard for the court to carry out its work. A second possibility, of course, is that the government might choose not to endorse this resolution, which is what we probably should advocate for, because in the end, it doesn't make much of a practical difference for these two particular cases. All it means is that other cases of post-election violence may not potentially proceed, and that would be a very sad thing for the victims in Kenya who support the International Criminal Court.
Thank you. I have to stop it right there. We will continue this conversation some other time. We do appreciate very much your insights, Professor Jalloh. And now, Professor Charles Jalloh is Professor of Law at the University of Pittsburgh Law.